The question that gets asked in a lot of small breweries that I've worked with is this seasonal batch worth it? There's times when brewers come up with recipes for seasonal beers that maybe aren't that economical. Maybe they only just barely scale to the full size system, and they might be troublesome to make, they might be expensive to make, or sometimes it's hard to know if they're even selling well at all. And is it worth the activity of going through that extra branding, getting an extra label, all of those things? So, in order to measure that, we're going to look at two things that brewers often don't track. And we're going to say days on tap, but this could be days in can. And it's how many days to sell out a seasonal batch. Or as well, we're going to compare it to our flagship as well. So how long it takes out to sell a typical batch. And then we're also going to pull some seasonal traffic data from some government and industry groups. And that's information that's totally in the public domain. So, just to give my clients a bit of privacy, I decided not to use the traffic data from anywhere where I've worked. I decided to use the traffic data from the highway intersection closest to my home. So, I live in Ontario, and our major highways are provincially managed. The government makes highway information available to the public at the following link. To demonstrate, I decided to pull up the information for the intersection not very far from my front door. And they have a handy table with the annual average daily traffic listed by year and location. And conveniently, it lists a summer and winter daily traffic volume as well. It even gives some information for weekday versus weekends. So I threw that data into Excel and graphed it here. The lighter colors show the summer traffic, which is significantly higher, and the darker lines show the winter daily traffic volumes. The two flat lines are the 22-year averages across the summer and winter figures. This is a very simple approximation. The summer traffic does show some year-by-year variation, but seems by and large stable over time. The winter traffic does seem to show a pattern of gradual increase in year-by-year volume, but for now we'll just keep things simple at a basic average. Comparing our figures, we see that the traffic was on average 52% higher in the summer and 28% lower than average in the winter across that 22-year period. This means that any business in my area that fronts on the highway would have 80% more exposure in summer than winter on average. No information is given for spring or autumn, so we'll assume that they are average, neither higher nor lower than typical, and we can weight our sales data with some real-life traffic volumes. We'll also simplify a season to be 1/4 of a year, or exactly 91 1/4 days. If we want to be technical, the length of each season isn't actually exactly equal, because of the shape of the Earth's orbit, but it's not really that important for what we're studying here. I deliberately obscured some of my clients' real data so as to not overshare and give them a little bit of privacy. So the figures you see here for the production volumes and production costs are deliberately not accurate, but they are in the ballpark of real numbers. For our purposes today, we'll calculate a seasonal score in this fashion. We'll compare our days in the season to the days it takes to sell out a batch, the dollar per liter sale price of the product, and the dollar per liter ingredient cost of the product, as well as the seasonal batch volume and the typical batch volume. This means that a beer that sells out quickly will have a higher score. Basically, a popular beer will have a higher score. A beer that has high losses or pricey ingredients will have a lower score. And these are all things that small brewers are very interested in. Seasonal batches don't really work when they're not in season, and brewing it 3 times in a season is great so long as all of those batches actually sell out. Likewise, it includes stuff that is of paramount importance to the brewer, i.e. the sale price and the ingredient cost. The comparison of the two batch volumes also gives a little bit of a feel for how difficult the product is to make. Typically anything that has very, very high losses is also going to be a bit of a pain in the ass to do. So taking our sample figures here, we see some fairly typical scenarios. We see summer and spring seasonals being a bit more popular and selling out a bit more quickly. We have some products that are having high losses, some that are being expensive to make because of the ingredients, and some that are indeed sitting around on tap for a fairly long time. We also have our flagship ale slotted in at the bottom. It's listed for being on tap for the entire season because of course it is. Its batch volume is of the typical size, and its ingredient costs are listed there as well. The big spike in this table we see is the spring seasonal pint, and that's because, in this scenario, we decided we weren't doing small samplers of the spring seasonal for whatever reason, possibly because it was running out of tap too quickly. We have a reasonable sized batch volume compared to our reference. Our ingredient cost is actually fairly low as well, and our sale price is, of course, higher than our reference. So all put together, it gives it actually a very high score. And these are those same figures plotted in a chart, and we see the same pattern that I was mentioning earlier. We haven't yet accounted for the traffic volumes that I gathered from that government table. This is where we introduce a traffic-adjusted seasonal score. Let's pretend the brewery that I gathered the information from is very near to my home, and use the traffic data that we've already gathered. We can now define a seasonal boost factor, plus 52% for summer, minus 28% for winter, and 0% for spring and autumn. Our traffic-adjusted seasonal score then becomes this. It's our seasonal score divided by 1 plus our seasonal boost factor. I've also written out the full equation if you like to skip steps. When we graph those adjusted figures, we see that suddenly things like the winter seasonal that looked like it was performing poorly don't seem so bad after all. We also see that the spring seasonal still is actually performing very well, and we notice that our fall seasonal, rather than being on par with our winter seasonal, is actually perhaps a point of concern. It's sitting around for a bit too long. Maybe the beer simply isn't that good and is still expensive to make.